swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today I'm excited to have my guest, Doug R. Doug's been sober since New Year's Day, 1997, 28 years sober, a fresh start in every sense of the word. A devoted single dad, Doug has built a meaningful life in recovery centered around family, freedom, and the great outdoors. Whether he's soaking up the sun at the beach, hitting the golf course, or just enjoying nature's quiet gifts, Doug brings a steady, grounded spirit to all he does. His story is one of perseverance, transformation, and showing up day after day. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Doug?
A little prayer to start this off. Is that all right with you?
That's 100%. That's wonderful.
All right. First of all, I want to say, Doug, I'm an alcoholic, and I appreciate you having me here. It's an honor. And I always kind of like just to ask God to let me set aside everything I think I know about his journey for us and about this show and what this is supposed to look like and, you know, how we're supposed to reach people. And, you know, and just I ask God to remove me and get me out of the way so I can share my experience, strength, and hope with you guys that it might help somebody else. And amen. I appreciate you again having me here.
Yeah. Amen, Doug. Thank you. So what was it like growing up, Doug?
So, you know, it's funny. I grew up in a normal family, had a rough life. I was born in Hawaii, and my parents were military, but we were from there anyways, and not a bad life. You know, looking back on it, my dad was military intelligence and counterintelligence, and you know, it's funny. I was taught to be honorable and honest and all these things, but him being into the intelligence business, there was also a lot of hidden secrets in our family about stuff going on and not telling people about my dad's career. And, you know, he was very elusive sometimes. And I picked up those skills from him. So that ended up helping me in my career as I pursued in alcohol and addiction. And, you know, I'll get into more of that in a minute. And, you know, as my mom described me, I was a happy-go-lucky kid that seemed to kind of just go with the flow. And then when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was given some medication one time. It was a cough syrup. And I noticed after taking it, the doctor told my mom, this is back in the 70s, the doctor told my mom, you know, you got to be careful with this stuff. And I didn't get high from it, but I got a weird feeling from it. And I noticed afterwards I was irritable, restless, and discontent. I did not know what that meant. I didn't know that was me. But I just noticed I started getting irritable with stuff. I feel like I didn't fit in, and I would at times. And most of the time I was kind of just this chill kid that just loved to have fun and be outside with our kids. And but I just noticed I just kind of started getting kind of out of place, and I was looking to change myself. My old sponsor, Adam, would always say he drank himself in alcoholism. I think I kind of was had the ism way before I drank. And, you know, so yeah, my brother gave me a sip of his beer, and I actually liked the taste of it. And I liked the little bubbly thing it gave me. And I didn't get drunk from it, but I did think about it, and I wanted another one, and I didn't get another one, but I would think about it. You know, it's interesting. We lived in Maryland outside of DC, and my dad was in 3 tours of Nam, and was always kind of gone. And my mom did a great job raising 3 kids. And, but I would kind of lose my cool a lot. My sister knew how to push my buttons, and I'd go off the handle. And we had these neighbors that were older and semi-retired that were kind of take care of me. And, they would send me over there when Doug kind of got out of control. And I always say Mr. Denny was my first sponsor, and I'd go over there all upset, and he would talk to me about things, and he'd tell me to turn it over. And kind of, he knew how to settle me down, and I enjoyed being over there. And, it's interesting. I always call him my first, like I said, my first sponsor. When I was about 7, 8 years old, one of his daughters was in college, and she came home, and she would take me to the liquor store with her. And I thought it was really cool. I got to ride with her and pick up the 6-pack of Miller Genuine Draft, and I got to carry it in my lap, and I was a cool guy, right? And we got to their house, and there was these college kids there, and I got to hang out there. And the first time around, I popped a beer for them. They thought it was cool, and I was allowed to take a sip. And then I popped someone else's beer, and they'd grab it. And then I popped some. I took maybe 2-3 sips that first time around, and thought I was all cool. And that didn't make me alcoholic, but I noticed I started thinking about that beer. And every time she would come home, the first thing I would say to her is, "Debbie, when are we going to the liquor store to get the beer?" And she kind of looked at me kind of funny with that. And so when I was about 8, I got kicked out of my first college party. Debbie took me to the store, and I grabbed the beer, and I'll never forget it. I mean, just shows how I'm alcoholic. I still think about this stuff, right? It comes to mind. And I put that 12-pack up on the counter, and the guy's looking at me kind of funny, and she shows her ID, and she buys the beer. We go along our way. We get there, and I noticed people really weren't drinking fast enough. And so I would pop the beer, and I would take a swig. And at some point, I was guzzling each beer. I was taking excuse my language, I was taking some big swigs out of that beer. And in my mind, I'm going, well, I'm going to drink it if they're not. And then they would grab it from me and do another one. So after a while, they kind of noticed I was kind of getting out of control with it, and they sent me home. And I don't know what I drank. I maybe drank a beer and a half. I don't know, at 8 years old. And I wasn't drunk, but I kind of felt tipsy. And, and I already had the lie in my head that if they busted me, I would just tell them, I was over with them, and I popped it open, and I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to taste it. I was kind of coming up with this lie. And nothing happened. I went home, and I hid in my bedroom for a while till I didn't smell like beer, because I didn't want to get in trouble. And that kind of showed me looking back in inventory, that was kind of showing me where my alcoholism was getting its start. And I was a happy-go-lucky kid, and some other people I've heard over the years, I didn't know how to communicate my feelings with people. And I remember one time they had this thing called the big wheel back in the day, and they were really cool. But I also what they call a crazy car. You would spin yourself in it, and I got a buzz from spinning myself, and I got addicted to that. And this one kid up the street, Michael, he wanted to borrow it, and I let him borrow it, but he wouldn't give it back, and he started taunting me about that. And after a couple minutes of asking him to give it back, he didn't. And so my solution was I picked up a big red brick, and I busted it over his back, and he ran off crying. Well, I got my big wheel back. And I'm like, okay, now that's how I solve those problems. And of course, his parents came over, and it was just a mess, and I got in a lot of trouble. And and so I got in my school years, I got in a lot of trouble with that. And I'd always kind of obsess on beer. I had one other time when we lived in that house in Maryland. My dad had a Pabst Blue Ribbon sitting in the refrigerator out in the garage, and it sat on the third shelf up. And I'd always sit there and kind of dwell on that beer. And if I stayed out of trouble in school, I was allowed to go get a Pepsi out of the garage. And I really didn't care about the Pepsi, but I wanted to look at that Pabst to see what it was doing, and I was kind of keeping an eye on this can of beer. And eventually one day I got up the nerve, and I had a story all over in my head. If I got caught, my brother was 10 years old, I was going to blame him. It was his, it was his beer. So I guzzled it, and I threw it into the cart behind the garbage can somewhere. I hid it. And for a couple of days, I was really nervous, they'd find it and they'd come maybe question, and they never did. My dad probably found it and maybe thought my brother drank it or whatever, and he didn't say anything. But that kind of started my journey. And, we moved back to Hawaii when I was 9, and that was a culture shock. Got in a lot of fights because I didn't know how to fit in, and they call white people haole. And I had no idea what that really meant. It was a derogatory mark towards white people, but it was really, in the beginning, it came out as meaning foreigner. And so it can be said with reverence too. Hey, Howley, like that. But I didn't know that. And so anytime somebody that was, would say that to me, I'd end up in a fist fight with them and got in a lot of trouble. And to say that is I found my friends and I started drinking, probably really started kind of playing around with it. It was 11, 12 years old. We'd get onto the park. Like a lot of people start off on the weekend, we get someone to go buy us beer. And I was always the guy that they'd give the money to. And I'd run up to the liquor store and stand by the corner and ask one of the Marines coming out of the Marine base, one of the locals, to get us beer. And I'd get a 6-pack or 12-pack. We'd drink 1 or 2 apiece and we'd go home. And then we started smoking a little weed and all that stuff. And the difference between me and my friends, in the beginning, we were all kind of same on that. And then I just could not, like that. We do it Friday and Saturday night. And then I'd be out Friday night with some other kids, or a Thursday night doing it. And I was still like elementary school, and I would do this. And I remember my friends would go home like at 10 o'clock at night, and I would go home. I would say I'm going home, and I'd be riding home, and my brain, if you asked me and put me on the lie detector test when we left the park at 10 o'clock at night where I was going home. But my bicycle would go in another direction, and I would end up with the older kids down the road. And sometimes I wouldn't find them. I'd ride around for a couple hours looking for them. But then sometimes I'd be riding around and I would find them, and I would be sitting at some other park somewhere with sometimes teenagers and sometimes, guys in the early 20s bumming beer off of them and smoking weed at, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I would come home and I'd always make up these lies. Like my best friend was Doug, and I was Doug. And I always say, I spent the night at Doug's house, or Lee, this other guy's house. And I started to have that, and I didn't know what it was, but I had this thing called the obsession of the mind. Once I started thinking about alcohol or weed or anything else, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so it wasn't like I drank all the time at that point, but I thought about it all the time. Then I had this other thing that started kicking in, was the allergy of the body, where once I put it in, I couldn't stop. That's when I started having troubles in my life where I wouldn't come home like I was supposed to. And it wasn't like I was on these 3 or 4 day benders, but I was supposed to be home at 10, 11 o'clock. I'd be home at midnight. Then when I got a later curfew at midnight, I'd come at 1 or 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever it was. And it's because I couldn't stop. Like I already meant to, and I didn't try to control it back then, but in my mind, I would have told you, yeah, I'm going to have 2, 3, 4 beers with everybody, maybe smoke a little weed and come on home, and some nights it ended like that, but a lot of nights it would be, once I get started, I couldn't. And everything, and I don't know if a lot of people can relate to this. Living in Hawaii, we had some wild parties and a lot of good times, and I'd have people come up to me. I was the go-to guy. Like if you wanted other substances besides alcohol, I was the guy to go to, and I was selling it and doing all these things in middle school and high school. And I was kind of that, some people are known as the jocks, really good surfers. Some guys had a really good reputation as surfers. I was a bodyboarder. I could ride pretty good, but my reputation was I was the go-to guy for weed and drugs. I was the party guy. And I kind of wore it as a badge of honor, and I was always kind of living up to that. And it started creating, and I didn't know this at the time, it started creating the unmanageability of my life. I couldn't tell you alcohol and other substances were my problem, but I started noticing there was something different about my life. Like I had some friends in 10th and 11th grade stop smoking so much weed because I know AA and I do have drugs, so I will speak a little bit of drugs, but, I would have friends who would not really smoke a lot of weed while they're at school, or sometimes barely at all anymore because it started causing them problems. And I would always sit there and go, that's probably a good idea. But because the fact that I was selling it, I always had it on me, and I just kept doing it. And I noticed probably about 10, 11, 12th grade, I was struggling in school, and I was trying to manage everything. I would take enough to smoke for myself and enough to sell, but I would never take a lot for myself. But then I'd always do more, like Tony Montana said in Scarface, never, supply, that's how you get killed kind of stuff. But I'd always go way over my mark because, I was always trying to fit in and all these things. And my usage got way out of control. And I would ride my bike to school even when I could ride with friends in the car, because sometimes I would have beer hidden out in the fridge and I wanted to ride my bike to school. And I had one hand, I'd have a beer, and the other hand, I'd have a joint riding to school. And I just didn't want to be interrupted by other people. And, and I, not to get into the whole drunk-a-log, but, it got to a point where it wasn't a lot of fun anymore, and we were talking about it in a meeting and, about this. And also I just started going back through the steps with my sponsor again. I've been sober a good while and I've been through the steps multiple times. So we're doing a deeper dive on all this. And I was given a questionnaire on the first step where I had to read it and then pray and meditate on it, go back and read it again, pray and meditate on it, and do this 3 times and then answer these questions. And was there a point, it talks about in the big book, kind of like in Bill's story, did I know where I can never use again? And I would have told you for a long time in sobriety, I never really came to that. But I remember when I was about 17, 18 years old, I was very big in the bodyboarding. It's boogie boarding. A lot of people call it boogie boarding. We call it boogie boarding now. It's really known as bodyboarding. But and you have to be in really good shape to do that. And you got to really keep yourself going. And at this time, I was using other drugs. I was using cocaine and these other substances. And I remember I was probably about 18, and I just started smoking cocaine. And, I was hanging out with the older people that I was selling it to and doing these things. And I kept crossing these lines of things I said I wouldn't do. And I remember one day, so we lived off the base near the Marine base, and they had some of the most beautiful waves in the world that would come in. The same as what you hear about North Shore and Pipeline, we got the same waves as they did. And so I would sneak kids on. I had a 69 Nova. I'd pile them in the trunk of my car, and we'd sneak on the base to the MPs. I'd play the radio, and I'd talk to the MPs. And in the meantime, I had 4 or 5 guys in the trunk of my car. And it was cool. We thought we were real cool doing this. But I was sitting on the beach, and all my friends were riding, and it was kind of a big day. And I was too scared to go out. And I knew I couldn't hold my breath anymore. My lungs were giving out on me. And I said, you know what? And I was heartbroken. Like, I started tearing up. And, my friends saw me there, and they were asking me what was going on. I really couldn't be honest with them. I kind of told them, I said, I just been drinking too much and doing a little too many drugs to go out today. But really, I knew deep down inside that what I was doing was not working for me. And I just knew that day had to stop. And of course it didn't. And it's funny, it talks about in the doctor's opinion, our problems pile up on us and becoming astonishingly difficult to solve. And that was my life. And it wasn't nothing major, but I got in a lot of trouble. Disorderly conduct, possession, speeding tickets, all these things. And I always meant well. I always would come up and try to manage my life. And the more I tried to use alcohol and drugs to manage my life, the worse it got. And I kind of remember, so by the time I was 18, 19 years old, I was in and out of court system a lot of times. I ended up, when I was about 19, I think it was about 19, I got in some trouble at one point. My dad had this attorney that was a retired federal judge, so I got away with some stuff because the first time I went to court with him as my attorney, it was more of like the attorney knew him. We're like, "Hey Lou, how you doing?" And I got away with what I got in trouble for and all these things. And after time, the judge told me if I ever come in front of him again, that I'm going to do 1 year in prison. And I was sitting there going, really? I mean, I'm like, I'm not like done anything major. Like, I got arrested one time for grand theft auto, but I didn't steal the car. The girl stole the car. And I had and that was a result of me trying to manage my using. I had a kind of a funny incident. I made a commitment not to go out and party. I wasn't going to give up drinking and drugging, but I was just going to be cool. I don't know if anybody can relate to this. I didn't have a car at the moment. Crashed a couple cars. I did like normal stuff, like drove my car in the ocean, like everybody else does, and all these things. And I had a night where I made this real commitment, and I would have passed the lie detector, and I was staying home. And I said, I'm just going to have a beer, because no one ever gets in trouble drinking a beer. Of course I do, right? But anyway, so I had that first beer, and I had another one, and I'm sitting there being cool, and I got a phone call from a guy saying, hey, there's this toga party down the road, and there's all these girls there. I said, no, I can't go. So I hung up. He showed up at the house. I really didn't know this guy too well, but he wanted someone to hang out with. And I started getting into my dad's liquor cabinet. I was taking little sips. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have a little bit of a scotch. Well, actually, I didn't like scotch, but it was kind of the only thing there, and a little bit of something else. And so I had the obsession going on, and I didn't know what it was. And he came over, and it wasn't hard to talk me into this, but he said, let's go to the toga party. We'll ride our bikes. We'll go over there. We can't get in trouble. We'll go over to the house. There's kind of normal girls there. Not all the crazy chicks are there. We'll just go hang out. And I wanted a normal girlfriend. I never really had one of those before. So we rode our beach cruisers, and we had togas on, and we show up at this party, and I was good for a minute, and then they needed someone to go get beer. Long story short, I got talked into going, and this girl said she'd give me a ride, and my alcoholic thinking was, oh, she is pretty, and she was a wild one, and so we went to Waikiki instead of back to the toga party with everybody's beer. And that was the first time I kind of ever really stole from people drinking. I was always an honorable alcoholic, but I took everybody's money. I took her down to Waikiki in her car. And long story short, she wouldn't let me drive the car home, and she almost killed us. And it was a big God moment. She came sliding around the corner, and I was holding on to the oh shit bar on the side, and I'm praying to God, because I knew we had to go up through the mountain pass, and I knew we wouldn't survive that. And I just said, God, please just get me through this. And as she came around the corner, there were 2 cop cars, and they pulled her over and drug her out of the car and gave her field sobriety test, and she was drunk. They threw her in the cop car. They gave me the keys to the car, and they told me to go on. And I share this as it was funny. From that moment, it turned out she stole the car, so they ended up arresting me for grand theft auto. And when I was in the felony cell, I was sitting there looking at all the alcoholics in the drunk tank, and I was in a felony cell with 2 other people. And this shows my alcoholism. The guy to my right killed a bunch of people at a Burger King and took their blood and did a swastika. And I said, this guy is sick. He needs help, and he's a derelict, and God forgive him of his sins. And the guy next to me thought he was a pirate and stole a 36-foot sailboat at Waikiki Harbor and was sailing out and crashed it. And it was just a crazy thing. And I'm like, man, this guy needs help. And then there's a drunk tank right in front of me. And I'm like, all those poor bastards, they need help. But I'm in a felony cell for grand theft auto. And I couldn't see my decision making because I was blaming her. She stole the car. I didn't know she stole the car. So kind of that was my thing. And I ended up a series of events. I ended up going into the court a lot. And one of the things, my mom was an enabler. She really didn't understand what was going on. She would give me money for tickets. And I always would go, meanwhile, she would ask me, okay, you're getting a ticket today. What do you think it is? And if I thought it was going to be $200, I would tell her $250. So I'd have a little pocket money afterwards. And she would give me the $200. And I'd go in there. And this is how my obsession of the mind would work. I'd go in there and be like, okay, I got $250. And the judge would say something like, oh, your fine's like $150. And I go, that's cool. I have $100 left over. I'm going to pay my fine today. And then he would say something, unless you don't have the money, we'd make payment arrangements. And I would go, and before I couldn't stop myself, and I would say, I have $75. In my mind is I always had a new job, or I was going to make money next week, great intentions, I was going to come back and pay it. And I wouldn't pay it. So all these problems, all these things, and my dad was on a first name basis with the sheriff, and all these things. And I kind of was, my first bottom was with all this. I ended up in court, and the guy, he said, if you come back in front of me for anything, you're going to do a year in prison. And I made a commitment not to come back. And about a month and a half later, I was back in court again. And I walked in and I'm going, okay, I'm going to prison. And there was another judge there, and he says, I'm confused. It's like a speeding ticket, and I'm supposed to put you in prison. I've never put anybody in prison for this kind of stuff. The other judge is coming back in a month. I'll let him deal with you. And I said, I'll never be back again. And this is where it talks about in the big book. He says, yeah, you'll be back. You have all these things piling up on you. And that was the problem. Problems piling up, and it's becoming astonishingly difficult to solve. And I had a moment of clarity. I'm sitting there. I'm 130 something pounds. I'm ghost white. I can't really do much. I can't function. I can't keep a job. All these things were happening. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go join the military. And I did. And before I went in, I had to go back to court. And I walked in the courtroom, and the judge was back, and he didn't even read me anything. And it was in this courtroom. It's kind of funny. You have all these pews, and everybody kind of loves to listen to what's going on. It's like they want to hear what everybody's arrested for. Back those days, you could really hear, right? And the guy didn't even give me that. Hey, you're arrested for this or that. All he said is, he said my last name and, Mr. R, are you ready to go to prison? And I said, yeah. And then I said, well, what about the fact I joined the military? And he flipped his lid. He was kind of pissed that I did that. But there was an MP there, so he made the MP go check. And MP knew who I was because he's arrested me before for things that I'd done on the military base. And he came back and said, yeah, he's scheduled to go to basic training. And he said, if you leave Hawaii and never come back and you fulfill your duty, all this will come off your record at some point, and I'll let you go. And that was the most devastating thing because I loved Hawaii. That was my home and all these things, but I knew it was the best thing. And you would think I would have gotten sober. And I went into the military, and I was changing my life and circumstances. I got out early on kind of a semi-medical thing. I'm not going to get into that whole story, but I was actually doing pretty good. Like, I wasn't getting in a lot of trouble. I think I used cocaine a couple times and would drink a little bit, but I wasn't the normal person I was kind of controlling because I was actually in a career move that I had a lot of self-confidence. I was going somewhere with this. And I got in an argument with the first sergeant, and he made a commitment to get me out of my MOS. That's your career choice. I was in flight operations. I was scheduled to go to Panama to be with the Army Rangers, and I was excited, and that was ripped out from underneath me. And that threw me through a loop, and I got out. They offered me an early discharge honorable, and I got out, and I made a commitment. I'm sitting in at New Jersey airport with a one-way ticket to Hawaii. And it was interesting. I sat there and going, you know what? How insane is this? I'm ready to give up my one-way ticket to Hawaii because I knew my mind was already telling me I didn't have a driver's license. They'd probably put me back in prison. And my thought was, well, I can go to my dealer's house because I know he'll front me a bunch of coke, and I'll figure it out. Like, I'll go and sell a bunch of stuff and make a name for myself. Because I'm now on 200 pounds in great shape. That's all I needed. But by sitting there waiting on the plane, I had a moment of clarity. And I had some friends that I used to run with and sell drugs to that were in Washington State. And they were telling me drugs were cheaper there, but there were more jobs. And so I traded my airline ticket in for a one-way ticket to Washington State instead. And I sat there in the airport, and I made this commitment that I'm not going to do that old stuff. And I wasn't going to quit. I just said, Washington State's supposed to be beautiful. There's mountains, there's fishing. I'll get a little pickup truck. I'll maybe smoke a little weed here and there because no one ever gets in trouble with smoking weed and drinking beer, right? Of course I do. And I get on the plane, and it shows you the allergy of the body for me on my story. Is I sat there with all these great intentions. Like, I would have put the lie detector test on and I would have passed it because I meant that I was going to change my life. And I got on that plane, and they offered me a free drink. And who orders a beer on a free drink? So I naturally had a double rum and Coke, and then I had another one and all these things. And, long story short, I met a beautiful Latin young lady who was going in the Army, and I was going off, and we hit it off, and we were stopping on Texas for a 2-hour layover, and I convinced her, let's stay the weekend in Texas and go have fun. And God intervened, and they wouldn't let her take her luggage off the plane, and that would have been a federal offense if her luggage showed up at the military base before she did. And so she didn't go with me, and so I ended up getting on the plane to Washington. Or I'd probably be living in Texas right now and having a little family with this young lady, and it probably wouldn't have been that bad. But that was just where I was at in my life, and I met well, and I had all this good integrity when I was sober. Like, I was honest. I wouldn't lie to you, and I wouldn't this, and I was a good guy and all this stuff. And I got off that plane, and I saw Karen and Dee, and they were there, and they knew how bad I was before. And they said, "You look so great." And I told them how I was going to change my life. And they just said, "We're so proud of you." Because we just said how bad off you were. And we get to the end of they knew I had money on me. And these are the guys that taught me how to smoke cocaine in the first place, as we call it, freebasing back in the day, and then later on crack. But and we get into the plane, get off the plane, we go into the parking lot, and Dee turns around and hands me a crack pipe, and I said, no, yeah. And I took one hit, and basically 2 years later, not getting the whole thing, I'm back down to 130 something pounds again. I crossed every line. I was committing felonies. I was living in a rat infested basement. I always have to say that. A lot of people nowadays have these huge basements. I'm 6'1". I banged my head going down in there, and I was 23 years old. It was piss stained mattresses. There were mice. It was just nasty. And everybody else that were derelicts were in their late 30s and 40s. And here I was, this early 20-something-year-old guy doing this stuff. And my biggest problem was I couldn't die quick enough. And I kind of really put myself in bad situations. We were in some really bad areas, like apartment complexes with razor wire all the way around it. And I thrived going in there. My whole thing is if I got myself shot, that'd probably be the best way to go, because I didn't have the balls to kill myself. And I wasn't suicidal, but I just didn't want to be me anymore. And I didn't know I was doing this at the time, but I was kind of calling out to God, and I was having these things. Like, we had this one time where we were committing, hate to say this, we were committing strong arm robberies, and I was the getaway driver. And the guy I was doing it with, he got caught because he made a dumb move of going somewhere, and everybody saw witnessed him and saw him, and he ran and jumped in the car I was driving. We ran off, and later on they pulled us over at a gas station. It was like you see in the movies. There's about 7-8 unmarked cars that surrounded us. Shotguns were out, pistols were out, pointed at us, and I was just like taking it to God. God, I'm done, whatever it is. And I wasn't in the car when they pulled up. I was in the gas station. I came out, and they didn't identify me. They described somebody else they thought was driving, because I was wearing a hoodie. And they told me to get away, and I tried to tell the cops he was with me. He wasn't there earlier, kind of trying to save his ass, but he had all the money for what he stole was in the car. And they left the car with us. It was Karen's car, and I made a commitment at that time never to, like, I'm done. I'm going to go do something. I'm going to move back to Hawaii. I'm sitting there, and then after the cops left and we calmed down for a second, Karen looked at me and she said, "What are we going to do?" And she goes, "Well, let's go to the dope house." And so we went to the dope house, and we got some more dope, and we kept running because we didn't know what to do. We knew it was wrong and knew we didn't need to be there, but we couldn't stop. And this is where my life started to change. My mom saved my life. She told me one day, I used to call my parents up and tell them crazy stories, like I got in a bar fight, which I wasn't at a bar. Some guy dishonored some woman, so I punched him in the face, and I got arrested. I needed my bail. Here I'm sitting at the dope house asking for them to wire me money so I can get bailed out of jail. And they knew that wasn't true, and they did it. But she basically saved my life. She says, she goes, "I love you, but I hate you. I don't know what all the things you're doing. I don't even want to imagine." But she goes, "I don't want you calling here anymore. if you want to, your dad really doesn't want to talk to you either. He's done with you. But if you want to talk and wish him a Merry Christmas or a happy birthday, you can, I guess. And she just told me she was done with me. And that was devastating. And I didn't get sober in that moment. But I knew I went from this happy-go-lucky kid, having some fun with using, big wild parties, doing all these things. And sometimes it would be big wild parties and all this fun, then to this dangerous side of getting in trouble. But there was always like blue sky in between the troubles. I don't know if you can relate to that. Had these dark moments of running the streets and burning things down, to having these moments of things got kind of straightened out once again. And this time around, there was none of that. It was just the last 2 years was just complete nothingness. And it was just, I had nothing to offer. I remember I'd ride the buses to Seattle at 23 years old going, I'd mismatched shoes. I'd borrow people's shoes. I didn't have shoes. And I'd see young couples like myself getting in cars, going to jobs. I'm like, why can't I be there? Why can't I have a normal life? And I started reaching out to God. I didn't know that's what I was doing. And, going back to Mr. Denny real quick, I say he was my sponsor. When I got about 8 years old, he started talking to me about spiritual matters. Like God's everywhere, God's in us, God's this. All we got to do is turn it over to the higher power. And he said these spiritual things to me. And sometimes they would make sense. And one time I actually had experience. I was probably 7, 8 years old. I had a spiritual experience. Back in those days, your parents would kick you out of the house for the day. You just go wander the streets of wherever. When you're a kid, you go play, And I remember just being upset about something, and I started taking it to God, and I had this moment like God was with me, and I felt really cool. I felt kind of loved, and I felt the presence. And the thing is it was fleeting, and that's where alcohol came in to my life, and drugs, because it made me feel like that. It filled the void, the hole in the soul. It became my power, my solution. In fact, at my bottom there, we were getting a handle of whiskey every night between two of us and drinking it. And I just remember one night we sat there and we drank this huge handle of whiskey, and we finished it, and I wasn't even drunk yet. And I was just going, wow, what happened? And I wasn't getting high off the Coke. I'm just like, something has to change. And I started calling out to God again, that he planted those seeds in me. And at this dope house, this woman showed up one day, and she gave me a cup of coffee. And I didn't know alcoholics love coffee, and that we were addicted to coffee. And she tricked me. And so she started showing up, and that was the guy whose house it was. He rented it from somebody. We all a bunch of derelicts stayed there. And she never condemned us and never told us we were bad. And one day he said, stay away from my mom. And I'm like, dude, your mom's 52. I don't want anything to do with her. He goes, no, you don't get it. She's an A. They'll brainwash you. And she was my Ebby. And she started coming around. We started talking spiritual matters. And it was just like me and Mr. Denny did. And I say his name, he's passed. I want to break his anonymity, but he wouldn't care. But we started just drinking coffee, and I started looking for this woman, and not to get in that whole thing, but she started sponsoring me, basically. She started taking me through the steps. I didn't know that's what she was doing. She was 12-stepping me, like the real 12 steps. She never condemned me for any of this stuff, and she started telling me these wild ass stories, and I would go to client, your mom really did all that? I mean, this clean cut woman. Oh yeah, my mom was crazy. There was a lot. He'd tell me all this crazy shit. I'm like, wow. And so I started looking forward to showing up, and we started talking about this thing called God and a higher power, and she, she. One day we did, and I can't remember the whole conversation. I just told her, I said, I told her about the spiritual experience as a kid. And I felt like there was a God. And I said, but some of the guys on the street says there's no God. And I said, but maybe there is, but he wants nothing to do with me. We hear that in the big book, we think that way. And, and she said, you put that ceiling up between you and God. And I could relate to that because I was in that rat infested basement. I kept picturing the ceiling that I was down there. And I put myself there. And she says, when you're done, you're going to have a night. She goes, you're going to have a time. You're going to be done. And I go, when is this? She goes, only you will know. And she goes, get on your knees. And I'm, what the hell? And she's like, get on your knees and turn it over to God. And I said, I don't even know what that looks like. She goes, throw out Buddha, throw out Jesus, throw out everything you ever heard, God, whatever you heard. And there came a moment, I was laying on this floor, and this is a dope house. So there's always people there. And, it was wild because I'm laying on this floor and I thought my heart was going to pop. I was doing all these drugs and it was 130 something pounds. I'm 6'1", sitting there going, I'm dying, and I had this great idea to do military burpees because I used to do them in the Army. And I figured I'd have a heart attack and it'd be done. And I had this moment of clarity going, this God has a sixth sense of humor, if there is one. He's going to, if I do these burpees and I have a heart attack, I'm going to be a 23-year-old with a bad heart. And, so I sat there for a minute and I laid there and I finally calmed down enough and I got on my knees and I surrendered to this higher power. And I asked God, I said, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing. I threw out some different concepts and I said one concept and there was just the room kind of warmed up, got really still. And it felt like someone just came up and gave me this big hug and was holding me. And I just sat there and I just freaking busted into tears. And I just laid there and I realized that everything was going to be okay. And everything is okay in that moment. And I just said, God, I surrender. And there was a knock at the door and I thought it was the police. So I opened the door and there's a clean cut guy and he has a blue windbreaker like the DEA agents would wear. So I put my hands out and he's looking at me like I'm nuts. I'm thinking I'm getting arrested. And he goes, why are you putting your hands out? I said, aren't you cuffing me? And he goes, no. And he goes, I'm here to see Clint. Long story short, he just got a treatment. He came to 12-step Clint. So this guy came in and started 12-stepping. He told me about where he went to treatment. And then I called the colonel. My dad was a retired colonel. I was scared to death of him. He had a saying, I put you on this earth, I could take you off of it. And I really felt like he meant it. And I called him up and kind of lied to him. I said, Dad, I'm an alcoholic. I need help. Because I thought I was just a cokehead, but I was really an alcoholic. And so God kind of fooled me in that. And I got honest with him. And, it was crazy as my dope dealer paid. And my dad called all these places in Seattle for me to go. And I wanted to go where this guy went because I know he had the depth and weight it talks about in the big book. I knew he had it worked for him where he went. And he said everybody that worked there was an AA, and I didn't even know what AA was. So I told this lady, and she goes, "Okay, if you're going to go to treatment, you have to get a big book." I had no idea what that was. She goes, "You're going to go to AA meetings, get a sponsor." And for 3 days, she told me that. And so after about 3 days, I went to treatment, and my dad came down. And it was crazy. I got to treatment, went through this whole process. And, my dad flew in from Hawaii and went to a really, really bad area, as a full bird colonel. And he went and paid my dope dealer. My dope dealer paid for me to go to treatment, paid cash. And then my dad showed up at this place and paid him. And then my dad came to the treatment center. We went into what they call the war room. I thought I was getting away with it because my dad was 3,000 miles away in Hawaii. And, my mom was there and my sister was here in Georgia. So I figured I was not going to have to do family time. And he ended up showing up to do that. And I always thought my dad bailed me out of trouble to save face, but I really look back on it. He truly loved me. He just didn't know how to tell me. He didn't know how to show me. And he showed me. He showed up at that war room, and I had to get honest with him. I really thought he was going to reach across that table and take my head off. I basically did a fist step with my dad. And that started my journey in AA. I know, are we running out of time? How's this look? And just kind of keep going where I'm doing?
Yeah, we can, it's your story, man. It's your story. It's great.
So, I want to get into some of the recovery. It was really cool. I went through 28 days. It was a 30-day program, and I sat with my dad in the war room, and I got brutally honest with him about some stuff. I didn't tell him every little thing, but I told him a lot of stuff. he shared some stories with me, and my dad was never alcoholic, but he shared some stuff, and I realized my dad, with the way he was disconnected, did 3 tours of Nam and 1 in Korea, and he was in charge of people's lives. A lot of people lost their lives. He was, he directed special forces guys and, all these things. And he was in countries we weren't in, and it was like, so it was, he had a lot of heavy duty stuff that he had to deal with. And I had no concept of that. But, getting sober, I kind of got to see what life is really about, not what my conception is, what I thought it looked like. And, 28 days in the treatment, they wanted to kick me out because they said I showed no emotion. They said, if someone dropped dead in front of you right now, you just walk right over them. And they're right. And it took me, I went from treatment, and, it's funny. I had a sponsor I worked with once, and they said, ulterior motive sometimes gets us to where we need it in sobriety. And they were talking about how they were showing up because they liked somebody at a meeting, and they would go to that particular meeting and ended up not getting with that person, but it helped them continue to go to that meeting. And I had an ulterior motive. I met a girl in the treatment center. There's the first girl ever kind of talked to me. I would look like hell, and I was like, man, she was kind of being nice to me. And she told me she's going to this thing called sober living. I didn't know what that was, halfway house. And so I had this great idea that I was going to go. And she told me where she was going. And so I told my counselor, and Jack was a guy who looked like Yosemite Sam, long redheaded dude that shot his mom with a 12-gauge shotgun in an LSD blackout. He was a true alcoholic, one of us. And so he saw right through me, and he said, where are you going? I said, I want to go to this halfway. Where is that? And I told him, I said, and he goes, what is it? I said, well, that's where you go. And I didn't know what it was. She told me, she goes, you go there and it's a halfway house, and you get a job, and, and you get into life, and you get to mingle. And my mind was, okay, she's a girl. She's there. I can get my first sober girlfriend. I was going there for her. And then I thought, too, as if she didn't like me, there's be other women there sober, and so this is like a thing made in heaven for me, right? And he challenged me, and he says, well, do you want your dad to pay for this, or do you want to be a man and step up for once? I said, dude, I have no money. And he goes, why don't you humble yourself and go to the state and ask? They have these programs you can ask for a little help. And I said, I'll do that. And so they did. And the funny part is I went to an all-male sober living place where you couldn't work, and it's 60 days, and you go to a lot of AA meetings, and that saved my life. God put me where I needed to be, and so I started this journey in sobriety, and I had some really wild spiritual experiences, and I came into the program at 23 years old, and I got about 3 years, and I started feeling normal, and went through a breakup and all these things, and trying to find myself. And I started smoking weed with a girl that wasn't in the program, and she really didn't want me to smoke, but I did try to fit in. And I was about to drink again, and I just said, I need to get back to the program. And I started coming back around. And then I moved to Georgia. I made a decision, kind of telling myself, I came to visit my parents here in Georgia, and my friends I grew up with came to visit. Used my parents' house, and they were drinking, so I drank some non-alcoholic beer at the time. And I just was trying to fit in, and I was so out of sorts. I was so squirrely, and I didn't realize. I just drank the non-alcoholic beer, and I didn't see that as a relapse in the moment. And I really didn't go to meetings when I was here. And back in the day, they had a strip club called the Globe Club, and my older brother took me to it. And I found my what I thought was going to be my next savior. One of the strippers was beautiful, and she liked me. And so I would sit there and drink this non-alcoholic beer. And so I made a decision to move to Georgia because they had beautiful strippers. And but I wasn't going to drink and do hard drugs and all these things. I was just going to find me this nice little. And she was talking about how she was going to quit and go get a job at FedEx, and this would be perfect. So I got a job interview, got hired at a car dealership because I was selling cars, and went back to Washington, collected my things, and I quit and came to Georgia. And she was nowhere to be found, thank God. And and I went on my journey, and met a woman that didn't drink. That was our attraction, and got together and stopped going to meetings for a while. I looked good on the outside for the first time. I was in good shape. I was making good money selling cars. We got pregnant right away. That's one of the things, and we dealt with that. And we had a child, and then I got to see real alcoholism. She started drinking after our baby was born, and she was a real hardcore alcoholic, and it was just crazy. I was going to church. I wasn't going to AA, and I was praying and all these crazy stuff, and it was just chaos. It was like, and I kept blaming her, and my sickness. I didn't know this until I started coming back to AA, as I was trying to be her guide and save her. I thought if she just would get her stuff together and be a good mom, because when she's sober, she was a good mom. But she had the extreme, like if she didn't drink for 6 months and she drank for 2-3 days, you'd have to strap her to a bed and put charcoal in her mouth for her to DT. And so I spent a lot of time dropping her off at detox centers and treatment centers and all this insanity. And I came home one night and I'm wearing my little suit and everything's looking good. And I come and find her on the floor in our townhouse, and I look over, the stove's burning over, boiling over, almost burning the place down. I put the fire out, and I started drinking a real beer, because I was drinking alcoholic beer once in a while. Why not have a real beer? And she looked at me. The only thing coherent she can say is, "You're an alcoholic. You can't drink." And I looked at her when she was on the floor. I said, "No, you're the alcoholic. You're on the floor." And I said, "I'm not getting drunk. I'm just having a couple of beers to take the edge off." And I look at back through inventory and being sober a long time now, this time around, I look at it as, normal people would have called 911 or called family members, or have had people in the program, people to come over and help them with this stuff instead of taking that drink. And I started drinking, and what kind of saved me is my daughter came down with crap hanging out of her diapers. And I had a moment of clarity. I said, I put that diaper on 10 hours ago before I went to work. That means she's been here the whole time without being changed for, probably even fed. And I said, if I get drunk right now, who's going to take care of this kid? And I said, well, wait a minute. I just said I wasn't going to get drunk. That was God. I think that was God speaking through me. And I just said, God, look, take this obsession away from me, and I'll give this AA thing one more try. And, I came back in, and, my life wasn't a better first several years coming back in. I was tried really hard, got sponsors, went through the steps. I did great for a while, but I was irritable, restless, content, and all these things. I was just all over the place emotionally, but I just kept hanging in there and kept trying. And I would do the steps, and I would go and try to go to, because the first time I got sober, they didn't ask you, they made you go to detox meetings, and they made you go to jail meetings and all these things. And I started doing those things again. Those things saved my life. And, it was funny. It was a little thing. I'd go to church and pray, and I'd do some prayers, but I was never getting on my knees and surrendering, in the morning and at night. And this guy, Don, he's a real big guy, and I really admired him. He's a cool dude in the program. He's sober a good while. And he says, real big dude. And he says, if I can get on my knees with my fat ass and my bad knees, you can too. And he didn't say it to me, but he did say it to me. And it just hit me. There's 50-something people in that room that day. And I just went, wow, he's speaking to me. And I just got on my knees at home and started surrendering. And just that humbleness of getting on my knees, things started really changing in my life. And I've sponsored a lot of people over the years. I've been to a lot of detox meetings. A lot of people know me in the metro Atlanta area in recovery. And, sobriety's been evolutionary. I had about 20 years or so. At 20 years, I hit this dry drunk. I sponsored a couple guys that OD'd, and I know it has nothing to do with me. They just, they're these guys who are just unwilling to really get honest, and it just hit me hard. And I wouldn't let people get close to me, and I got very just standoffish. And my sponsor was a great guy, but we really just talked. We went through the steps a couple times, did several fourth and fifth steps with my ex-wife, kind of stuff like that. And I needed a new experience, and I went through the steps with a couple different people, and I had some experiences through that. And a number of years into it, I asked this one person, I really loved what they had. the way they were living their life. And I asked them to sponsor me, and we went through the steps. And I said, look, and they have less time in sobriety than I do. I said, look, I want you to treat me like I've never done this before. And we went through the whole step process, and we did a lot of the steel on steel. We did a lot of the, theater of lie, coming out of the book, talking about the masks we wear and, how we perceive ourselves. And it was just a really amazing deep dive. And I started coming alive again in that. And it's really cool. Raised my daughter in sobriety. My daughter didn't talk until she was 4, and she'd go to meetings. And people would say, I can't go to meetings today because I have a kid. And I'm like, bullshit. I got my daughter. I take her to meetings, and, we'll help you, with daycare and all these things. And I've sponsored a lot of cool people, and I've had people die, and, it's cool. There's people like the day when I left that sober living, I went from that treatment to that sober living for 60 days. The day I left, I was 2,000 miles away from anybody, and I had to walk to an AA meeting, and that was the longest walk of my life. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Jerk with Jerry Lewis. He's walking with his pants around his ankle, and he's holding the chair, and the dog was biting. All I need is that chair, and the chair, and all I need is the remote. Then he goes, all I need the dog. The dog biting me. He goes, I don't need the dog, and he's doing that, and that was me. And I had to do this walk because Saturday morning they gave me a bag of clothes that I had, and I had $90 worth of food stamps. And that was the loneliest walk. And I went to AA and told people for the first time, I said, I need help. And they surrounded me. I never been homeless since, and that was life-changing. But the reason I share that, if you came up to me in that walk and said, here's $1 million cash, give me one phone number of someone to take your call right now, I wouldn't have it. And today it's insane how many people I have in my life today, and evolutionary, and, and I've gotten some of the biggest bottom feed. I call them bottom feeders, people that were just down and out of, and I was, and I sponsored this one young lady that, I ended up, and the reason is that no one else, she was an alcoholic meth addict, and, and the women were running away from her because she was so smart. She knew the big book better than anybody in the room. She would quote the big book, but she couldn't stay sober. And so, she was a single mom with it, and she was dying. And so, it's crazy. I talk to her a lot, and I've had other guys like this too. What was cool about it was I put all my different, it was that woman that saved my life, and I go, if I go into it in front of God, how's that going to look? Because I know it'll happen. Like, he'd go, I give you this broken person. You're the only one in the room that day that was willing to help her, and you did. And I wasn't willing to go through my maker on that. And it was really cool. And, we went through this process, and, and the reason I bring her up a lot is because I have a daughter that's similar age. And I was thinking, I want someone to do the same thing for my child. And, this was about 8 years ago. And now this woman is going to have a baby soon, married, having this incredible life. And I'm not sponsoring her anymore. I handed it off to some ladies down the road, but we remained to have a pretty strong relationship. But it gave me a totally different perspective on how I handle my relationship with my daughter. And it's crazy. My daughter came around the rooms, moved to California, went back out a little bit, and now she's about 2.5 years sober. And when I went to visit her, we went. First thing she had me do is go with her to a detox center and take a meeting to a detox center, because that's what her dad always did. So that's what she's doing, and and it's nothing I did other than show up. And now she just moved back to Alabama with some guy. Who knows? Can't control her. And that was the thing. My old sponsor said, you were the reason I sponsored you is because I didn't like you. I just thought you were insane. I said, what are you talking about? I had a great job, I was clean and all this stuff. He goes, yeah, but you were insane. You thought you were God. You were going to save your wife, and you were going to save your kid. And, and I had to let all that go. And that's what the program was given. If you're new and you're struggling, just surrender, and the answers will come. And the longer I stay sober, the less I know. And it's cool. I just had a current experience. My daughter just came up to called me and told me she has a new boyfriend and she's moving to Alabama with him. And as a dad, you're thinking, okay, who's this guy I'm going to have to bury? And these things. And I just turned it over to God, and he turns out so far he's a pretty cool dude. And so I say all that is I don't have to have the answers. So when you're new, it's like, I know people just struggle trying to find the answers. And the answer is just God, surrender, and this program. And nothing's changed over the years but me. And that's kind of my story. I do the same things. I still take meetings at detox centers. I still go on 12-step calls. I had a guy ask me one time, he asked me to sponsor him. He's like 20 years sober. He goes, I got to ask you. He goes, are you on some type of list? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you've been sponsoring me for about 6 months and you're getting all these phone calls for 12-step calls. And I said, that's just me being willing. I said, I don't know. It's just, I'm out there, and so that's just, my story and what it was like, what happened and what it's like now. I live this incredible life. And, and I'll end with this is, you see my view. I just moved into a new place. I'm right on a little lake. In the morning and at nighttime, we have deer running around. And I'm sitting there praying and meditating with deer, and I never thought I would have been here like that. So that's all I got right at the moment. I don't know if that helps anybody.
Oh, I'm sure it's helped somebody. And what, and you said, the stuff that you do, Doug, what does a typical day look like for you? Like, how does your, take us through a day in sober Doug's life?
Oh, shoot. I try to get on my knees. I just moved in this place trying to move furniture around to have enough room. And, sometimes I don't do it long enough because I got to take that pee. But I get every morning I get up and I do a set aside prayer, like I started this with, as God, let me set aside everything I think I know about you. And I asked God to keep me sober. I had some time in sobriety, and I realized that I just assumed God was going to keep me sober. So every morning I get up and I do a set aside prayer just to move myself out of the way. And I ask God to please keep me sober to be service to somebody else. And then I start praying for people, family members, other people I'm doing business with. I'm in commercial real estate, and and sometimes I get frustrated. So I pray for the people I'm representing, and I'm praying for the people on the other side of the deal. And, I do this little thing, and then I get up in the morning, and in my new place, I bought this used espresso machine because I buy espressos, and now they're $5 every time you go in there. And now I want it at the house because it saves me money, even though it costs me a good chunk of change to get. And I get my espresso every morning, and I walk up and I go sit out there in the patio and I look over the lake and I just have conversation with God. And then from there I go on in the day, and and through the day I bring God into this. Sometimes I'll be in a car somewhere, I'll go to a meeting, and after I try to go to a meeting a day still. A lot of people try to debate all this. How many meetings go to all these things? I just go, and sometimes I'll go 2 a day, and sometimes there'll be a day or 2, 3 days and I'll miss and I'll go to other ones. But I'm grounded in a home group. I have 2 home groups. I have a CA home group, Cocaine Anonymous, Spearheads. They come out of the AA Big Book, and I have the Alfreda group's been my home group forever. And I go to those meetings and some other meetings, and and I try to wind up my day, sitting out, talking to God, thanking God for the day. And then when I go to bed, I get on my knees and thank God. And I try to reach out and call a couple alcoholics a day to check on them, and and have guys checking in on me, and just kind of keep trying to build that sober circle. And that's just kind of the day of Doug.
It's a good day. It's a really good day. And well, I appreciate you sharing your story, Doug. And but I can't let you go without our rapid fire questions. And I know you're nervous. No,
let's go. Hold on, let me drink my water on this one now. Come on.
All right, get your water.
I talked a little too much. I'm overheating now. I gotta.
That's all right. You're good.
I'm not overheating. I'm just like it is.
He's got you guys can't see him. He has smoke coming from his head now. He was on fire for a while there. All right, sir. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Where life is a loose garment.
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, geez. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Killing people with that one. No, but there's more to it. Yeah, keep coming back. It works, but you got to work it. And you got to jump in and grab a sponsor. So.
Yeah. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
My sobriety superpower? I don't know. I think that I'm willing to go to any length to help another alcoholic,
That's a pretty good
they're
one.
They're there, they're willing. I'm willing to go fucking drive and go sit with them, 2 a.m. at a Waffle House, but they got to be willing. I'm not going to do all the work.
Yeah. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Surrender to God. Do God's will. Don't do your will.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
That's interesting. Depends on the day. Sometimes it's a little AC/DC. Sometimes it's a little Aerosmith. It depends on my mood. Like a little Bob Marley still a little bit. Hear a little jazz. That gets me kind of going. And, I don't have a set song every time, but there's certain songs, that kind of kick off. And I'm like, that gets me going,
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
One wish? I don't know. I wouldn't change anything about my sobriety or my past. Wouldn't wish to shut the door on it. Every once in a while, I'll say, I wish I did this younger, but I don't, I lived this incredible life, and it just, I wish I had the ability to get the cotton out of people's ears quicker,
What step do you love the most?
Oh, God, it depends on the day. I guess the third step, the one we have to do perfectly is first step. And, I was going to read something I had a second, my sponsor and I doing, but it's interesting. I've been sober a long time. Now it's like, are we really ready to look at the insanity? And so maybe right now it's the second step, because I think we can overlook that. And we can forget how insane, because I think a lot of times we think insane is running down the street talking to ourselves crazy, when insanity could just be that I'm believing my own BS,
What step do you love the least?
I love them all. I don't think there's one. I think they form a circle. If you really look at it, I love the 12 and 12. When you look at step 12, because it puts all the steps together. And if you really go through it, looking at that, reading it, they all there's a purpose in all of them.
What's one of your favorite movies?
Oh, geez. I don't watch a lot lately, but I do, some old school movies. I have to think about that for a second. Shawshank Redemption. He climbs out 500 yards of shit, on the other side. That's cool,
Yeah.
I'd have to say that.
That's a great metaphor movie.
Yeah.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Been waiting on you. And heaven is on earth too, like it does say in the Bible, heaven on earth. So I really believe there is, because it's here now. That's how I kind of live my life, that we're in it. Like, God has given us this beautiful planet. Really, life is not that hard, So
yeah.
I know it is. We are in heaven right now. We just got to start treating it that way.
Well, I really appreciate you, Doug, and I appreciate you sharing your experience, strength, and hope. And I know
it was good. I hope I did okay for somebody, and if somebody hears something.
Absolutely. Somebody will hear something, and that's the cool thing about what we do, right?
Yeah. I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you, brother. So please subscribe to our friends at the dailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of the Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. You can visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show in your favorite podcast apps: Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please like, follow, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a good day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.